the thing about this that's so perplexing, and I would probably chalk this up to just roster misevaluation and not getting the right pieces and also not getting the buy-in that you need. But this coaching staff, they didn't just forget how to coach defense, right? I mean, 2022-23 season, their first year here, defensive rating of 95.0 on KenPom, 27th in the country. Last year, 96.8 defensive rating, top 25 in the country. This year, the defensive rating is 101.9. That ranks 100th nationally. It's last in the Big 12 in defensive rating. And John, if the season ended today, the 101.9 defensive rating would be the worst by a K-State basketball team in the KenPom era.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible.
Hello and welcome into another edition of Free Launch. John Kurtz, Cole Manbeck with you today to talk about a lovely K-State men's basketball game last night. They lose on the road at Oklahoma State 79-66. Back-to-back road losses after, K-State had with just a couple of minutes left, a 6-point lead in Fort Worth. Let that slip away, and things have really gone downhill. Certainly calls for a drink, which, of course, we know you guys will oblige our friends at Holiday Distillery with some Ben Holiday bottled in bond bourbon and 360 vodka. Make sure you've got that on tap for whatever you're doing this winter. If you're going to hang out around the fire pit, if you are going to watch these K-State basketball games, you probably need some. Go ahead and get it from our friends at Holiday Distillery. Great K-State folks who support the show. K-State outscored 43-24 in the first half. It was really over by halftime. And Stillwater, a team that in Oklahoma State had been possibly the worst in the Big 12, certainly felt like that in a lot of ways. I watched a bunch of their game with West Virginia where they got totally blitzed in the first half over the weekend on Saturday. Just really disheartening. It was back and forth for the first 12 minutes or so of the first half, and then Oklahoma State runs away with it the rest of the half. Coleman Hawkins did not have a great first half, was much better in the second half, but too little too late. And I know he said after the game, the team kind of came out flat. It was pretty obvious they came out flat, which just disappointing to see in a game that, if you're going to win a road game, this would have been the one probably to get.
Yeah, I mean, these were their two best opportunities to win on the road between TCU and Oklahoma State. And the thing that's so frustrating, John, is that you came away from Cincinnati thinking, okay, maybe they hit the reset button heading into Big 12 play. They're 1-0 to start. You got two winnable road games at TCU and Oklahoma State, and probably the most winnable, least daunting atmospheres that you're going to play in league play. And the effort is good Saturday at TCU, right? I mean, K-State has 18 offensive rebounds. They hold TCU to 39% from the floor. I didn't have an issue with the effort at all against the Horned Frogs. It was just a matter of they missed a ton of open shots, and they didn't make enough plays in the last 3 minutes and choked away, squandered a 6-point lead in the last 2:30 of that game, which was gut-wrenching because you were thinking, okay, they could be 2-0 going to Stillwater with a chance to get to 3-0 in league play and really start to get the good vibes going in that locker room and build some momentum. They lose to TCU in heartbreaking fashion, and you're like, are they going to come out angry? They're going to come out flat? Did it demoralize them? And we got our answer, you could tell, in the first few minutes of that game. I mean, when it was 23-22, they were lucky for it to be a 1-point game because K-State's effort was dreadful in the first few minutes of the game, and it didn't look like they were bought in at all. They were flat. Coleman Hawkins acknowledged it after the game. Look, Coleman Hawkins, credit to him for saying those things, but Coleman Hawkins was flat. He was not engaged in the first half of that game either. And so the box score for him looks good in terms of 18 points, 7 of 13 from the floor. He had 5 turnovers. Lazy defense. He wasn't good either. Nobody for Kansas State was good in this game. And so very frustrating that they reverted back to their ways of not looking like they really cared. They didn't look bought in. And you lost now to a Wichita State team on the road by 19. That's 133rd in the net rankings, John. And they lost on the road at Oklahoma State, which came into last night 120th in the net rankings. And you got bullied. I mean, you weren't close. You never got it closer to 11 points after the, 5-minute mark in the first half. So very disappointing effort.
Yeah, I mean, I echo all of those thoughts. It was completely uninspired. It was ugly. The first, until Oklahoma State broke away, it was just a really ugly game where you're like, man, this frankly looks like two of the worst teams in the conference. It does not look good at all. And you talk about like the wild swing of what this Big 12 season has turned into right now. And, for a while there at TCU, it was looking like, all right, legit shot at 3-0. And honestly, maybe I would question, the maturity of this team or lack thereof, lack of leadership that seems to be on this team for the most part. If they had won at TCU, I do feel like we'd get a better effort at Oklahoma State. I mean, I feel like they fly in the wind so much with what's going on in terms of how they react, and there's just not anything to really stem the tide when things go wrong. But now you look at it like 1-2, just got blasted by Oklahoma State, and then Cincinnati, they were terrible last night at Baylor. They lost by 20. They're 0-3 in the Big 12, so that felt like a really nice win over a ranked opponent at the time, but it looks like Cincinnati, much like I thought in the offseason, was a bit overrated. Now, there's plenty of time for them to come back. We'll see. But they're certainly not off to an encouraging start. And so you just look like you're very much in that jumble of teams that have started off pretty poorly in the Big 12 at the bottom right now, BYU's look pretty bad. Utah's look pretty bad. K-State, Oklahoma State, TCU, you're just in that group, and it looks like it's going to be really, really daunting to pull out of that.
Well, and then you got Houston on Saturday in Manhattan. K-State's going to probably be 15-point underdogs or so. The analytics have that right now. Bart Torvik projects a 72-56 type game. Houston's been dominant of late. Number one Ken Palm defensive team in the country. Once again, Kelvin Sampson putting that team together. They're also over 41% from three, which makes them an even more daunting, challenging opponent because they're really shooting the ball well right now. And so Houston probably going to be 1-3. Then you got Texas Tech at home following that as well. And Texas Tech just won back-to-back road games, dominating Utah, I believe, and then winning at BYU last night. And so, you're going to be underdogs in that game. Then you go to KU, right? I mean, there's a real chance they're sitting at 1-5 at that point in the league. Now, they could win one of those games, 2-3. But the bottom line is they're 7-7. Like, the thought in my mind after Cincinnati of hoping they get it reset, be maybe a 10-10, 11-9 type team in Big 12 play, that's already gone for me. This team just lacks the leadership and the maturity, as you said, to be a consistent team in Big 12 play and win enough games. And so it's very frustrating, but the next 2 months just don't look like they're going to be much fun for us.
Yeah, I mean, to break it a little further down in terms of the Oklahoma State game, like, they rely so heavily on, because of this roster is just so weird, man. And I want to talk a little bit more about that later on with a guy who played last night that just hadn't really until lately. But it's just such a weird mix of, like, Coleman Hawkins can be a really high level player. Doug McDaniel can be a really high level player when he's on. David Gasson is typically a very steady high level player, but they rely really heavily on those three because, like, everybody outside of that, Brendan Hassan on a milk carton. Somebody find him for me in Big 12 play. Like 2 points in 21 minutes. They cannot survive doing that because the guy can't defend. Max Jones, he's 2 of 8 from the floor, 1 of 5 from three. If he's not knocking down threes, same kind of case as Hassan. Like, he's just not providing enough outside of all that. But they've got to get, like, great games from that trio of Gasson, Hawkins, McDaniel, and Gasson and Hawkins, their box scores will look better than what their games actually were. And then Doug, 6 points, 3 of 8, 4 turnovers. They rely so heavily. We talked about it in the Cincinnati game. Like, hey, they got a really good game from all of those guys. They're not going to win many Big 12 games unless all three of them are really on and engaged. And then some of that problem becomes, can you keep Doug McDaniel on and engaged? And I thought it wouldn't be much of a problem with Coleman Hawkins, but like you said, he was not in the first half. So that's the predicament they're really in with this weird Frankenstein roster that they have.
Well, and what's frustrating about that is last year we talked about they had the big three, right? And if the big three didn't do well, then K-State, if 2 of the 3 of those guys weren't on, I'm talking about Cam Carter, Arthur Kaluma, and Tyler Perry, they didn't have a chance to win last year with those 3. And this year when we came into the season, we thought, all right, they're much deeper. They're going to have a team where they have more options. So if, 1 or 2 guys aren't on, they still have other guys that they're going to be able to go to and that are going to be able to thrive and carry this team. And it really doesn't feel that way. I mean, it feels like it's David Gasson, it's Coleman Hawkins, and it's Doug McDaniel. And last night, Doug McDaniel and Coleman Hawkins combined for 9 turnovers. I would make it 10 because Doug's responsible for a shot clock violation on an inbounds play with 2 seconds, where it appears he doesn't know that there's 2 seconds on the shot clock, which is inexcusable from your point guard. You could tell Doug wasn't engaged last night. I mean, from the start, he had a couple passes that weren't even turnovers that were just awful, though. He was not locked in at all. And what's disappointing about that, again, John, is it gets back to the TCU game where Doug was great in the second half. 12 points, made 6 of 10 from the floor, had 5 assists in the second half to just 1 turnover. Now he missed the front end of that 1-and-1. That was crucial late in the game, obviously. But aside from that, he looked really engaged, locked in, and then he comes out and looks like that on Tuesday in Fort Worth. And so there's just no consistency with these guys. And yeah, the roster, David Gassan's been great. He has an offensive rating of almost 135 on the season. He's been absolutely phenomenal, shooting nearly 67% from the floor, 17 rebounds at TCU, 12 last night. Nobody can deny how good and the effort that David Gassan gives, but it is unfortunate that he doesn't have much teammates that can give that consistently alongside him.
Yeah, I don't mean to put him under the microscope too much for last night. I did think, Gassan set the bar pretty high, maybe still left a little bit to be desired, but he cares. I mean, he's playing hard. He's far from the real problem there, but man, yeah, there was an interesting twist with the roster, which I think underscores just a lot of the issue with this team right now that I will tell you about after we shout out our good friends at Home Field Apparel. We look, as bad as it is right now, you can make sure that you look good at least while you're watching your team, and you can do that at homefieldapparel.com. Get that K-State hoodie that Cole is wearing right now. I also have it, very comfortable. I wear it to bed a lot because it's so cozy. I am a big fan of that K-State hoodie. I've got a couple others. You can get the shooting shirt, whatever it is. They'll get you hooked up, 50-plus K-State designs, 100-plus other teams. If you want to be a turncoat like DY, you can do that as well at homefieldapparel.com. Use promo code 3MOUNT24 for, why am I forgetting? Is it 15% off your first order? 15%?
15. Yep.
Promo code 3MOUNT24 for 15% off your first order, homefieldapparel.com. We're back in just a moment.
Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your #1 source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
So part of the issue with this team this year has just been a lack of consistency and rotations and trying to build any semblance of like chemistry between all these guys. With Doug at the beginning of the year, it was like he's not starting. He's totally benched for a game. They can't get through to him. And then even when they finally do start him and he plays well against Cincinnati, it was basically Jerome Tang just being forced to. Like he didn't... the assistants, and then a message that he heard from God, like pushed him to start Doug McDaniel instead of him actually wanting to start him. So you've had that going on all year. And then, all of a sudden, like halfway through the non-con, like Moby is playing and nobody really expected all of that. Caleb Rich is getting more minutes. David Castillo is like starting one game and then not playing the next game. And now we have the latest edition of that. One of K-State's, most pricey bigs on the bench. You got Onyenso, Kentucky transfer, a lot of interest, a lot of hype around him. He hadn't played in how many games had it been since Ugana Onyenso had played? Had he played in Big 12 play before last night?
His last game was 2 minutes against St. John's December 21st was his last game. That was Wichita State.
Okay, so Wichita State. So he hasn't played in 3 weeks.
Yeah, and he's played 17 minutes total since November 19th, John. And we're recording this on January 8th. So
that's crazy, man.
17 minutes over about 6 weeks of game time. And guess what? He played more than 18 minutes in the second half last night.
Yeah, right. Didn't play in the first half, and they're just getting their rear ends kicked at halftime. And so all of a sudden it's go with the zone and then use Ugana Onyenso for 18 of the 20 minutes in the second half. And, he had some moments, 7 points, only 1 rebound, but a steal and a block, like affected some shots. It looks like he has something there. And it's just like I'm not saying the guys looked particularly engaged on the bench or whatever, but you went out and got these guys. Like this was supposed to be the roster, like you mentioned earlier, Cole, to avoid being pigeonholed into a big three situation like last year. I don't know, man. It's either one or the other. You've got to either be way better at evaluating who you're bringing into the program or be way better at getting through to them once they're on your roster, or both, because it is just torpedoed this team. There's no chance. I mean, I'm sorry, it's too late for one, but two, there's just no chance that this is going to work consistently because nobody's. I mean, he's not really bought in. I know Jerome Tang said after the game, I heard him on post game with Wyatt, like, hey, no one wants to hear a positive, but that is a positive, and hopefully we get this from him moving forward. And like, sure, I mean, that'd be great. I'd love it, but it's just it's too late for everybody to legitimately like build chemistry with him and make it work. And Doug, it feels like kind of the same way. It just this was not the way to try and operate the roster. And by the way, I should have done this before that. We'll get Cole's take on this. I'll make it the top storyline, brought to you by our friends at Alenco, alencohome.com, ALENCO home.com, to get the scoop on anything you need home improvement wise, basically anywhere around Manhattan and Kansas City. So please visit our friends at alencohome.com, ALENCO home.com. But that feels like it is, as much as anything, really set back this team, just the roster management this year.
Well, I mean, you've had too many moments like we've talked about before where you're sending messages to guys or benching guys to prove a point, or guys that aren't bought in and they're sitting on the bench and then sporadically they're getting thrown into the game. It just feels like the staff is having to reach numerous times to try and find somebody that can give them a spark or give them a lift. I mean, Ani Enzo last night against Oklahoma State, they go to the zone look to start the second half because they're getting bullied on in the inside. They can't stay in front of Oklahoma State's guards either, John, which is concerning in itself. And so they go to the zone, they go big. They got David Gasson, Ani Enzo, and then Coleman Hawkins on the floor as well. And as a result, Ani Enzo plays 18 plus minutes after playing 17 minutes over about the 6-week time span before that. Buddy Rich, who had some nice flashes offensively the prior game against TCU, scoring 8 points in a few minutes in the second half against TCU, doesn't play, I believe, in the second half against Oklahoma State last night. Moby played in the first half. He doesn't play in the second half against Oklahoma State. David Castillo, very similar, right? And David Castillo has struggled shooting the ball. Obviously, his offensive rating of 85.2 is the lowest on the team. It's been a bit of a struggle for him, but they're just the rotations out of whack. Ashore leaves the team, leaves the program. Obviously, that throws things as well. There's no continuity with the rotation, the roster. They're just struggling to find their roles. I don't know, man. It's tough. I mean, when we talked about like not having enough options, we've talked about how they need Doug McDaniel and Coleman Hawkins to be on for this team to really reach its ceiling. And on the season now, John, according to Bart Torvik, Doug McDaniel has a 94.6 offensive rating and Coleman Hawkins' offensive rating is 97.1. CJ Jones is 99.5. And then everybody else really that plays is above 100. And so those two, Coleman Hawkins and Doug, have your highest usage rates on your team, and they have two of your worst offensive ratings. And so the lack of consistency from them, and again, Coleman Hawkins has been much better other than against Oklahoma State. He wasn't very good, but he's been much better of late. I think a lot of those numbers are dragged down from the early start and early struggles this season, but those two just haven't been near consistent enough comparatively to a David Gasson, right, who has an offensive rating of 134.7, which is top 25 in the country. You got among guys with a 15 usage rate or higher. And so, yeah, they're reaching and trying to find a guy that can give them a lift. And last night they went to Ugo. Now, what do they do going forward? I mean, John Jerome Tang said going into this season that this team reminded him of that, I think, 12 or 13 Baylor team, and they played his own, right? So is he thinking now maybe they're going to go to his own and play big and play Ani Enzo down there and be that anchor? I'll tell you, if they're going to go to his own, they better find the corner shooter and defend the three a lot better than they did last night when they did go to the zone. OSU went 5 of 12 from three in the second half.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've seen major changes like that work. I mean, you think about the Jacob Pullen, I will not play basketball in the NIT year. They switched midseason to the pinwheel offense of Brad Underwood, and that worked really well and took them from being out of the field to a 5 seed by the end of the year. But I think you can tell by the tone of my voice, I just don't have a whole lot of faith in that happening here. There's no Jacob Pullen on this team, man. There's nobody to like pull them through. Like David Gasson is in terms of effort, like that type of guy, but he's not, the way he scores is not running anything through him or a guy that can just go get his shot. And by nature, I think, he's a little bit more of a lead by example kind of guy. There's not that on this team, man. It's just been the worst case scenario with the roster from what we thought in the offseason, where, what they really need is better players on the wing and, a little more veteran leadership to go along with like Coleman Hawkins and David Gasson. And instead, it was just all these bigs that didn't fit very well, and that led to them not being able to figure out how to utilize them, which led to attitude problems, which led to a guy leaving the team and a guy pounding on the bench for a really long time. And suddenly you're playing Moby. Nothing against him, but I don't think the expectation was that he was going to be playing minutes in Big 12 games. So
yeah, I mean, it's concerning. Coleman Hawkins after the game, we hinted at it earlier, but quote, everybody needs to do more as far as taking care of responsibilities, whether that's on the court or off the court. It's as little as the way we warm up. I feel like we didn't warm up well enough. I feel like we came out flat with no energy. I feel like at times we just don't take the pregame warm-up serious. I think everyone needs to take a bigger jump in discipline, end quote. That's from Coleman Hawkins after the game last night. So he's trying to send a message to the guys. Will it resonate? Will it get through? I mean, it's concerning that that's happening at this point. It's January 8th, and, we're talking about that, right? The other thing I would say, John, as far as, this is probably actually bearing the lead because I was going through the numbers last night. The thing about this that's so perplexing, and I would probably chalk this up to just roster misevaluation and not getting the right pieces and also not getting the buy-in that you need. But this coaching staff, they didn't just forget how to coach defense, right? I mean, 2022-23 season, their first year here, defensive rating of 95.0 on Ken Palm, 27th in the country. Last year, 96.8 defensive rating, top 25 in the country. This year, the defensive rating is 101.9. That ranks 100th nationally. It's last in the Big 12 in defensive rating. And John, if the season ended today, the 101.9 defensive rating would be the worst by a K-State basketball team in the Ken Palm era, which dates back to 2002-2003. So 23 seasons of basketball, and their current defensive rating is the worst of any K-State basketball team if it ended today. The next worst was the 2002-2003 season when they ranked 100. They had 100.3 defensive rating, and they're 101.9 right now, and they're getting ready to head into a very challenging brunt of the schedule, Big 12 play, where it could get even worse. So, I mean, John, it's concerning. K-State under Bruce Weber and in the first years under Tang and the staff have been really good defensive teams. I mean, you could go up and down the list. I mean, we go all the way back to 2008, 2009, 2007, 08, really when Hugs came in. I mean, they've been top 40 in defensive rating as I'm looking at it, and probably 90% of the seasons. And this year they're 100. I mean, there's that goes to they didn't probably evaluate the right pieces to fit and mesh, but also goes back to like there's just not enough buy-in. There's not enough effort. Guys getting on the floor. There was a rebound last night that bothered the heck out of me where Oklahoma State got an offensive rebound. They dove on the floor, and K-State's got a guy just reaching down trying to grab the ball. Get on the floor and show some effort.
I mean, yeah, and just like thinking about the schedule coming up, I mean, like the road games coming up, like it's, home games, I guess we'll see how the rest of this year goes. They obviously tend to play better at home, and they have surprised us over the last couple of years with some of the efforts at home in a positive way. But your next road games are at Kansas, at Baylor, at Iowa State. Like, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, those won't go well, right? I mean, that's the thing. There's no easier Big 12 environment than Gallagher-Iba Arena in the last few years.
Yeah, there were like 12 people there last night. There's nobody there.
Yeah, you're not going to – and these are the times of the year when you like playing road games because the students are gone wherever you go, right? And so the atmosphere is far less daunting, and those two places anyways, TCU and Oklahoma State, are easier atmospheres even if the students are there. And so you squandered those two chances, and it's only going to get far harder when it comes on the road. I mean, maybe the next comparable winnable road games will be Utah, UCF down the road, but even then, UCF's knocked off Texas A&M. They were dreadful against KU on Sunday, but they also won at Texas Tech. So, it's It's tough. The other thing I would say, John, is that we said coming into the season, we thought they dramatically improved the 3-point shooting, right? I mean, last year they were at 31.8% from three. That was 285th in the country. Well, as we sit here today, they're 34% from three, which isn't an awful number, but it's not great. It's not what we thought they had added. 143rd in the country in 3-point percentage. They're 15 of 62 from three in the last 3 games. That's all Big 12 games. That's 24%. In the past 6 games, they're 39 of 140 from three. That's 28%. They're not shooting it well either. I mean, John, Doug McDaniel is 3 for 20 from three in his last 6 games. He's just 10 of 45 from three this season, 22%. This is a guy who came into the year 89 of 245 from three in his career at 36.3%. He's shooting 22% on this season. He also came into the season a career 77% free throw shooter. He's at 62% this year. Max Jones, 7 of 25 from three in his last 6 games, 28%. Brendan Hassan, 9 of 29 from three over his last 5 games, 31%. David Castillo, 0 of 11 from three in his last 4 games he's played in. They're not shooting the ball well. They're also not getting to the free throw line. They're 295th in the country in free throw percentage at 67%. That cost them the game against TCU because you couldn't make your free throws. They're 271st in the country in free throw rate at 29.4. So last year they were 43rd nationally in free throw rate at 38.3. This year they're 271st in the country at 29.4. They don't get to the foul line. And the other thing I'd mention in late game situations, John, which comes back to TCU, they miss a guy like Marquise Noel and Tyler Perry that just iced the game away at the free throw line. How many times did those two just go to the line and you knew they're going to bury both free throws time and time again? And instead you got Doug McDaniel going to the line and it's a coin flip, your point guard. This team there's just too many things they don't do well.
Yeah, the free throw stuff. And I'm never a guy. I used to get annoyed in the Frank Martin era when people would complain about the free throw percentages of those teams because I was like, look, they're uber aggressive. They get to the line a lot. So, you're going to have to deal with some misses. That's okay. What they do is generally a net positive there. And I would get annoyed all the time. But yeah, with this team, you're not getting there, one. And then when you do get there, nobody is even. What is Hassan shooting from the line?
I think he's like 77% now.
Okay.
He made both last night, but yeah, he was below 70 at one point.
Yeah, even he has been disappointing. He's the guy that's the lights out shooter. I felt like for a while there, I almost trusted him more from three than I did the line. They have nobody. And, how often are you going to get Hassan to the line anyway? Especially in Big 12 play, like people have been able to completely take him out of games. He's just not effective at all as a piece in Big 12 play as the competition has ramped up. And again, you've played the easier part of your Big 12 schedule so far. The 3-point shooting is a great point. It's just not there right now. It's killing them. Like if it's like CJ Jones, Max Jones, and Brendan Hassan are just not effective enough players elsewhere to be that bad from 3-point range. Like Hassan needs to be 41% instead of 31% for him to be an effective Big 12 level player. That's just the reality with how limited the rest of his game is right now. So they've got a ton of holes. And I guess the last point I would make here, just thinking about these road games coming up that I talked about with Baylor, Iowa State, and Kansas, not only, Cole, will you be in environments where like the students back, and obviously it's just a way tougher place to play anyway. All 3 of those places are going to be out for blood. Like, Kansas, that much is obvious. Iowa State, that much is very obvious after everything that's happened between the coaching staffs of those 2 teams. And then even Baylor, first of all, I will say I did the anonymous Big 12 player survey for my newsletter, Open for Business, at Big 12 Media Days. I got a lot of players tell me that Baylor was one of the toughest environments to play in the league. And now Baylor, they have not beaten Tang, right? There's going to be a little bit of an edge there. They haven't been able to beat Tang since he came over to Manhattan. So there's probably a bit of an edge there at a place that's been a tough environment now that they have their new arena.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just feels like it could get really, really ugly over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, it absolutely could. And I was actually going back, John, last night and looking at the road history for K-State to see, how we got to this 13-game losing streak. And a lot of it is situations like what happened at TCU, right? TCU reminded me, remember Texas Tech last year on the road? K-State had a chance to start league play 3-0.
Yeah, 100% game. Yeah.
They were up 57-49 with 3 minutes and 10 seconds left at Tech last year. and they lose 60-59. So they squandered an 8-point lead in the last 3 or so minutes of that game with a huge opportunity on the road. There were 4 or 5 games last year, John, where K-State's either tied or within 2 in the last 4 or 5 minutes of the game. You can go to Cincinnati last year on the road, right? They're up 1. Cincinnati gets a game-winning shot with a 3 to win the game by 2 with 10 seconds left. They hit the game-winning shot. BYU game, they're down 66-64 with a minute left in the game. BYU hits a 3, that's a dagger, beats K-State by 6. I could go up and down the list, and then you got TCU, you got up 6 just last week on Saturday, and in the last 2:30 of the game, you don't score, and you end up losing that game by 1. Like, there's been a lot of last night was an embarrassing effort against Oklahoma State. That was different than a lot of the road games in the past. They've actually been pretty competitive on the road. They haven't been able to close, which comes down to, execution, toughness, and coaching as well. And they got to do a better job of closing when they're on the road. But these next road games are so daunting that I don't think they're going to be that close. So we'll see what happens Saturday. But yeah, with this roster, I mean, it's sad to say, John, but I'm almost to the point where it's like I'm just ready to get to March and reset again and overhaul the roster. And
I guess, but I don't know. That's a whole different conversation for a different day. The best case scenario is that things go well enough that there are a handful of pieces they feel like they can keep and that would make sense to keep, because you just can't keep doing 12 new players every year.
It's a whole, we'd have to go down the role of that conversation and guys you would like to see back. And look, I mean, that's the goal after Cincinnati, right? We were talking you were hoping you could build some momentum, at least go 9-11, 10-10 in Big 12 play, and kind of keep the ship on track, keep the ship righted, and not completely fall apart. And now, after what I saw in Stillwater, I'm just a little worried this thing could really go off the rails, John. I mean, they could be sitting at 7-9, 7-10, and knowing the tournament is completely off the table. And I mean, it is to us right now, but in their minds, this thing could fall off a cliff. And so, that's another conversation of how many guys you like to see back. They do need to have some continuity and, what that looks like, but you got to get buy-in from these guys to know who you want to have back too.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. To me, it's always been a threat of this not just being a 1-year issue, but a multi-year issue based on how things go. So we'll see. I mean, there's plenty of time to turn it around and plenty of opportunity to turn it around, but it's not looking great. We appreciate all of our friends at Holiday Distillery, at Alenco, Home Field Apparel. Thank you to everybody who sponsors the show. Appreciate all of you guys for listening. Patreon.com/Freemaw if you'd like to get signed up for more and be a part of the Discord, which is always lively. I did enjoy the live chat last night. So with that, we appreciate Nick Springer behind the scenes. Thanks to Cole Manbeck. I'm John Kurtz. We'll talk to you soon here on Freemaw.